FDC Academy Livestream. I'm Dan Fowley, and with me, as always, Peter Chalmers. Peter, welcome.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Just afternoon. I've
Yes.
got to remember that.
Yeah. We'll figure out time zones one day.
A very hard thing, apparently.
Yeah. And how are things in your neck of the woods today?
Things are good. Things are... Look, we have to start with it. You know we're going to start with it. So it's a bright, sunny day over here. It's 16 degrees. It's actually quite nice outside. Compared to the weather we had earlier this week where it was torrential rain and it wasn't very nice at all. So
very similar here. About I think the high's 15 today, which is quite warm for us this time of
year. There you go. It's almost summer.
Yeah. Basking in it. So what are we going to talk about today, Peter? I think we're going to...
Well, career paths, I thought was something we could talk about. We sort of touched on it a few times, I think, in previous streams. And I mean, there's some stuff that we're doing internally on this, and that sort of, it's very much in the forefront of my mind. I think we should talk about career paths. What type of careers are there now in Salesforce and that Salesforce ecosystem? And where can you go, and how do you get there, I suppose, is what was in my mind. So
cool, let's do it. So how did you get into this ecosystem, Peter?
Well, so my background is in business and sales operations. I'd spent all my life in financial services, so working for some large insurance companies and banks and things like that. And I, in the middle of the GFC, got a new job that was working for a software development company over here, and it's still in finance operations. But they were using Salesforce as their platform right across the company, so managing all their licensing and their and the whole business, not just the sales side of things, but the whole thing there. So that was back in 2006, I think 2007, something like that. So it's a long time ago now. And I saw Salesforce for the first time, and it intrigued me, having come from that financial services space where you spend a lot of time. I always had like a system bent to the roles that I was in. So I spent a lot of time, building up things like, business requirements and all that type of stuff. And it would take you 18 months to do things. And then I saw with Salesforce how quickly you could do things. And it was a massive eye opener for me. And so much so that with that company, I moved into a business platforms manager role. And that really, it was my sweet spot. It was the best of both worlds. It was handling all the stuff that the business wanted to do, and then being able to work with the team to actually build that stuff out, not just in Salesforce, but other systems as well. But Salesforce was the main one. I want to actually make a bit of a career out of this. So I jumped on the other side of the fence and went into a project as a consultant and hands-on building stuff, but also doing all the process mapping and that type of stuff, and doing those requirements. So it was that, again, it was that balance of the two roles, and it was really, well, I'm still doing it. So I have no desire to go back into that finance or sales operation role at all. So what about you, man? How did you get on this side of the fence?
Yeah, so I was doing sort of various development roles without being a trained or qualified developer, and had done some fairly niche work early in my career in the bulk mail industry, doing a lot of data manipulation and things in fairly niche languages, not overly taxing in terms of the complexity compared to some of the stuff in other languages. And from there got thrust into a Java J2EE world, which those Java Enterprise days was way over my head. And I did not have the qualifications or background to flourish in that role. It was I got placed there after a bit of a restructure that was happening, and So quickly kind of figured that out, moved into a technical BA role, found my feet a bit more there, working on some ERP projects, and it was technical enough that it kind of met my needs from that point of view, but not so hands-on and technical that I was out of my depth. So nice middle ground. But that working on ERP projects got me interested in information systems in general, and started to explore things. Paused career, did some traveling, came back and started to explore what was on the horizon, and without a job to hitch myself to, just a bit of general exploration and chatting to people in the market. And I had a mentor at this previous role who had left at about the same time I had. We caught up, and he said, look, we've just rolled out this system called Salesforce. I think it's the next big thing. This is 2007. And this individual had always steered me well in that mentorship kind of aspect before in terms of advice. So I thought, why not back myself? And then the kind of key realization once I got my head around or just did a bit of digging was I could sign up for a developer org and have all of the same functionality as an enterprise edition account. The only restriction was the amount of data. I was like, this is like music to my ears, because that's how I'll learn best, and versus any other, to become a consultant in any other kind of ERP platform or anything, you can't just teach yourself SAP. That's just not a thing. Yeah. So definitely gravitated towards the kind of transparent nature that Salesforce provided, and taught myself everything I could, and initially started finding some roles on websites like freelancer.com and elance.com back in the day, and things in this part of the world were fairly new from a Salesforce point of view, but obviously in the US things were a bit more, probably 2 to 3 years ahead at least. And so via these websites I would pick up these really small jobs, 5 to 10 hour jobs to do updates to different systems for US clients, and that was the very early days and forged that beginning.
So given it was back then, I found myself that it was jumping in the deep end. That first project I was on, change sets had just come out, and we decided to use change sets to push things between the sandbox and up into production and all that type of stuff. I had no idea what I was doing, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
But we worked it out, and it was pretty cool, because I actually managed to. It worked, and that was extremely satisfying, actually, being able to do something like that. How did you find that type of stuff? How did you keep on top of, or how to understand what to do? Was it just jump in the dev org, just tinker away, or?
And well, that's exactly what it is. And you make mistakes and you learn from them, and you iterate. The first major design mistake I made, which I kind of still remember and use it as an example today, is I was working in an org that took CSV files from different insurance companies. So it was for a broker who dealt with multiple insurance companies. And each insurance company provided a CSV file in a similar but different format.
You can guarantee that.
Yeah. But obviously there's overlap. But the cleanest, in my brain, my first impression was, okay, the cleanest thing is just to create a custom object per insurance company. And then I can just build that object to match exactly the CSV file, and the import via data loader is going to be nice and clean. So went ahead, implemented on that way, tabs across the top per policy from company 1, policies from company 2. And that works until you want to report across, show me all the policies that this customer has, because they might have policies across. Show me all the policies that are coming up for renewal next month. So that was how I learned about record types the hard way. I was like, well, we want to give a different lens, but it's kind of the same data, and these 4 fields, policy number, start date, end date, they're kind of common between them. So getting my head around this notion of, okay, we can build out an object that caters for all the different files, but we don't have to display all those fields on every single page layout. We can cater for that with record types. And that was and once that kind of moment clicked of, this is what this feature's for, and this makes it all the more useful. That was kind of, making that mistake was a good thing, because it was the catalyst to then really having a deeper understanding of the system and what comes next.
I think on that point, but I mean, we've also seen stuff over time that the way you would have done it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would do it differently now, because we've got more functionality and more new ways of doing it. Record types is a good example now with the dynamic fields coming out.
Yeah,
that maybe we'll see
that's
a reduction in the record types on that front.
Yeah,
which again we talked about before.
Yeah.
When I came into the space, there was 2 roles basically. There was a consultant and there was a developer. And a developer was, you cut code, and a consultant was, you do not cut code.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different now, isn't it? We've seen a whole range of job titles come up. Some mean the same thing, some don't, but
Yeah, there's obviously different terminology used by different organizations that kind of means the same thing. And it's interesting at the moment, I was having a discussion with one of our team yesterday around, well, is the definition, I write code, therefore I'm in this camp, versus I point and click and I'm in this camp, which is traditionally, as you just said, kind of been the way.
Yeah.
But what we were talking about flows. And actually a flow is very similar to writing code. It's just done in a different way. And you need to understand a lot of the same concepts. And so where's that going to sit? And what's the hybrid in the middle? And where does a non-developer draw the line and say, I need a developer to help with this, or someone with that skill set? That's has a good understanding of logic, I think, is the key thing there. But to your original question, within the different roles, obviously we've seen different levels, different kind of pathways that people are going through as they kind of get into the ecosystem. And I guess we can talk to, as you said, some of the things that we've mapped out in our organization, and certainly on the functional side, we start people off what others might call a junior consultant. We have a solution analyst who's very config driven, understands the implementation of the functionality, and probably at that more junior end takes direction around here's your requirements. You will go away and point and click and develop the required functionality. And then as you progress through that, just classic gaining more autonomy to know, okay, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. You implement the functionality that you see as fit to implement to solve the problem, basically. And then there's a little bit of a fork, I think. Often those more senior consultant roles start to take on project management type responsibilities, probably starting to get the less work around getting their hands dirty with doing the actual configuration, but probably more so on the solution design side of things, and just leveraging that experience that they've got from having done many implementations by that point to ultimately be mapping out the solution that more junior team members can follow. But again, you'll always find hybrids to that as well, and you'll find the odd functional that can write a trigger or otherwise. And actually, if we could talk about what's changing as well as, and our team's seen this, as FCFDX is now as a any role within Salesforce, you need some skills around using the command line and committing work to a repository, and things that you traditionally that those DevOps skills are becoming quite important as well. And that's a learning curve, and it can be a steep learning curve. I put my hand up and say I'm no SFTX expert myself, and would need a lot of hand holding. I can sort of follow my nose once it's set up, but setting up from scratch is work to be done there from my point of view.
I think the other thing I can see bubbling up recently is like that security type of role. Someone that's there responsible for managing the security or giving advice on the security model, not just around from the Salesforce perspective, but your integration points and all that type of stuff as well. It shows the maturity of the platform and also how people are using it. Do you think there's any other gaps that are out there at the moment in dedicated roles or parts of roles that we're starting to see come into that Salesforce?
Yeah, I think we've had this debate before when we had Sam from Envision on a few weeks ago. The role of the architect, which is it's an interesting one because there's a school of thought that says it's come about solely off the back of the certifications. Developers, senior developers like the challenge of an exam, and sort of go down that path. Particularly with the newer, the 6 or so exams that you can do leading up to I guess doing this CTA, which is they are the real heavy hitters of architecture. And not every project needs one of those, but certainly the ecosystem as a whole, there seems to be a big demand for those. And again, we've said it's the maturity of the ecosystem that's driving a lot of this stuff. And if we think about, you and I both have heard of examples where very large corporations are re-implementing Salesforce. They're doing their second time around, and that's where I think those CTA roles become critical, because if you get it wrong the second time, then you might not get that third chance.
It's not just a silo thing anymore, is it? It's if you've got a TA that's involved, that you definitely have got a proper enterprise instance or company that you need to deal with and do things the right way. I think the next level down from that is also the solution architect, which I think is a very vital role. It's sort of solution architect for me sort of sits in that BA. It's higher than a BA, but that's that type of mindset as well, because it's that side of it is the TA obviously handles all the technical side. This is what you should be doing from all your structure and how you should do that. But the solution architect side is more on that. This is what the business wants to do, and this is how we should guide it. And that's when they then come hand in hand with the TA from that point, or in our case, the senior engineers and lead engineers and that type of stuff as well. So we've seen those roles bubble up a lot lately.
Yeah,
which is good.
And those are critical, like you said. It's that step above a BA to say who's going to bridge the gap between the requirements at face value and the capability out of the box of the system, and we need to meet in the middle somewhere and create something that's going to meet the requirements but also not take us off too far out of standard land, for want of a better description, so that we've got an easy to maintain system in the long term. That becomes, you could customize and code an org to kingdom come to meet requirements exactly as they are. But there's so many things, and again, you would have seen it, I've seen it, where you only have to change a requirement a little bit and you can do it very easily. But there's a line that's crossed, like, okay, now we can't do this out of the box at all. Now we have to completely recode this page. We're doing this whole page in Visualforce now, back in the day. I'm showing my age. Just because we can't meet this one requirement for a custom date picker. right? That kind of scenario, we're going to override the page layout for this tiny thing.
And I think
Thankfully, it's getting better, but that was the line you used to walk.
But that happens with every project where you go down that route of someone says, look, I need to understand the 5 different colors that these people think about at nighttime. Why? Because I think that's something we need to know at some point in time. But you got to be able to challenge things and then be able to design things around that to get the right outcome. There's at times there can be a reluctance to push back because in our case, customers say, look, we want X and we have to give them X. But there's different ways to get to X at the same time. So and that's where I think that role sort of plays, because it's the more senior type of role, and they can bring in their skill set, their experience, I think, from things that they've done. To your point before as well is, we try to stay as native as you possibly can with point and click and all, and that approach, which is definitely the right approach. But there is a balance, right? Things that you can't do and you shouldn't do in point and click, and it's getting that balance and being able to articulate that. Had that conversation yesterday with one of our guys around the project, and then being able to explain that to the customer about, look, yes, I know that we want every single thing in point and click, but that's just not the way it's going to work.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a bit of a maturity thing, but it's also, in those roles, it's people that feel comfortable being able to challenge things and have not be concerned about being pushed back, I suppose, from a customer at the same time on it. So
yep, and that shows the importance of soft skills as well as any system specific skills as well. And probably a good segue into one of the questions we were going to talk about around, often we're dealing, there's a skills shortage in our ecosystem. How do we bring people in from other ecosystems with different technical experience, but the concepts of CRM are familiar, the learning curve, we've all come to this from something else. So, those soft skills that someone may have picked up in a completely different world can be quickly applied, and then build the technical skills on top, be it from a functional or developer point of view. Have you seen in your experience, people come from other industries that have worked out particularly well?
Yeah, and in reality, that's exactly the type of people that I've been looking for previously. It's someone that's got experience outside of either the industry that we're dealing with or that skill set. You want someone to come to the table thinking in a different way, and if you can demonstrate that, then that's the type of thing I've always looked for. There's always more than one way to resolve an issue. I was going to say something else, which might not have been right, but anyway. So you want to, the things I enjoy are having a conversation, debate around how we should do things, and then you walk away going, yep, now we know that we've got the right solution in place. So having someone coming in that's got more than or has got a varied background, I think is actually quite good in that regard. But we're also at that stage now in this evolution of the ecosystem that we've got people coming into this as a career straight from uni. We've got the courses that are being run at uni now.
Yep.
So coming straight into it, and this is what they will, they're not going to have that type of experience. So the question is, how do we instill that? How do we get it across them? So
yep. Yeah, and the interesting is, we've got one new starter this week and another next week, both joining us without previous Salesforce experience. One on the technical side, one on the functional side. And the good thing today, again, we've talked about this before, is Trailhead provides the perfect introduction to get through that. And you and I didn't have that luxury when we
No.
started. We had to kind of figure things out for ourselves on the fly, and that's where, again, it's probably where you and I very first conversed. Was I remember back in the day, 2008, the Salesforce community on Twitter was super helpful, and that was how you learnt a lot.
Hashtag, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hashtag AskForce, which I haven't seen for a long time. But
yeah, we should bring that back.
Yeah.
So having the right support and mentors, still is huge. But if you've got a tool like Trailhead as well, I think it makes it less scary for someone thinking about jumping into this ecosystem as well, knowing that there's this very well formed starting point. In our case, we're letting people have 2 to 3 weeks to just deep dive on Trailhead, and then shadow on some projects and apply what they're learning, and then start to connect the dots. Like, cool, okay, we're working on a project that's implementing X. I did the module for that in Trailhead. Still early days, but I'm starting to build up some context behind it. And from that point of view, I think, hats off to Salesforce for Trailhead, because it is absolutely superb.
Well, I've actually learned stuff from there. I mean, you do stuff for a long time, and then when you go on and do those trails and things like that, actually, and that's just reaffirming you do know. But I've learnt new stuff along the way as well. It's good if we're going into an engagement and it's something that you haven't touched before. You can go, there's a trail for. I'm just trying to think of omni-channel, for example. Let's just pull one out of the air. Go and learn from that. Whereas before it was, go through the help screens, Google, find a whole heap of stuff out there in the community, that type of stuff. But this gives you that all that information. So, and you get tested on it to make sure you do know what you do.
Yep.
You do know what you're doing. Yes.
Yep. So. Yep. And on that front, I had an example 2 days ago where I learnt about and I'm sure it's, unless my memory's failing me, it's a feature that's been introduced at some point in the last 10 years, but I overlooked it. A checkbox on lead that's require validation before converting the lead. And I was like, brilliant. That's so simple. That's exactly what I need. And I didn't know it existed. And because I guess my memory might be tagged to a time when that didn't exist. So, there's always opportunities to learn. And you never stop learning, really, as they continue to bring out new material.
Yep. New material, new changes to Salesforce as well. So, it's also a case of keeping on top of those things.
Yep.
So it's good in that regard too. So, yeah.
What have we seen? We sort of touched on it, but the development path, how's that evolved? What we're seeing at the moment, I guess. It used to just be you were a Salesforce developer and you got lumped in a pretty big bucket called Salesforce developer. And now we're seeing the difference between Lightning and what does that mean? What does building Lightning web components mean? Building JavaScript is a very different paradigm to writing backend Apex. I think we're starting to see, you'll always have the developers that can turn their hand at both. But I think we're starting to observe developers showing a preference for where their interest and skill set sits. And definitely I think, we've seen examples in our team of developers who may have that non-Salesforce background in other front-end languages and that are starting to see Lightning Web Components go in the same direction, and they're gravitating towards that and saying, hey, this is now going back into a world that I'm quite familiar with and comfortable with, and I'll just park myself here and focus on this, and I'll work with another developer that can write all the back-end Apex that the project needs. So I think we'll probably start to see a lot more specialization as we go through that.
Which makes sense,
And then the next evolution of that, which I still haven't got my head around, is the introduction of Salesforce functions that was announced at Trailhead X a few weeks ago. And this is this introduction of being able to write code in other languages other than Apex.
I was going to ask what that was, because I chose to sleep instead of watch that. So was that what Evergreen was called before? Or
Yes, correct. Yep. Evergreen is now Salesforce Functions.
Right.
So, that will be interesting as well. It may attract some more developers into the ecosystem who realize they don't have to retrain. Or it lets Salesforce developers kind of expand the scope of their skill set as well and delve into other areas that they've maybe had an interest in, but just their role hasn't given them the opportunity to flex that muscle.
So touching on what we said before, that there's more than one way to do something with functions, does that give us that opportunity, that option to go with a different language instead of going with Apex or so-called, Apex. So so that then into that decision matrix around how we're going to solve that problem introduces another whole decision tree and more complexity, and there's lots of factors that come into that, being it just the skill sets that you have on hand to solve a given thing. So the evolution of that will be quite interesting. It's always an interesting time in the Salesforce space.
It's always evolving, and with the roles, I guess, will continue to change to match that as well. And we'll see more specialization on that side. And actually, here's a question for you. On the Salesforce AE side, with account executives, we've seen them go into very specialist areas themselves. So there'll be a service cloud specialist, marketing, all the different clouds. You become, a specialist in a particular area at the enterprise end, certainly. From a functional point of view or a solution architect point of view, it's so hard to keep across all the functionality. So it will be interesting to see if, we start to see more specialization in roles, right? I'm a specialist at implementing Service Cloud. I know cases, I know all the features associated with Service Cloud, CTI, Omnichannel, all these things really well, and focus my efforts there. And maybe that exists today in some of the bigger consultancies that we don't see.
I think there might be a bit of a flavour to it, but I don't know whether we've got to that level. And you're right. I mean, like the big end of town, they might be at that level. But we can't be an expert in everything at the end of the day. I think as things evolve, as it grows, I think we're leaving it down to an industry and cloud specialist type of level. Because again, if you're in insurance, you need to understand everything about that ecosystem, but also how that particular cloud that you're a specialist in would work in that, versus being in manufacturing. It's a two different paradigms, really. Similarities, but not. So I'd sort of expect that we'd get to that level at some point in time. So
yeah, and that'll be over the next 1 to 2 years, start to see some of that unfold potentially. And especially as Salesforce keep making acquisitions, so by you sort of acquiring ecosystems at the same time. So there's a whole bunch of MuleSoft people who may have known MuleSoft really well pre-Salesforce, and now they kind of find themselves attending the same conferences, and if once conferences are a thing again, and mixing up and being part of organizations that are doing multiple things, so starting to get exposed to more. And that's the tricky thing. Then how do you bridge that? As you just said, you can't know everything, but you kind of need to know enough so that you can make good decisions around picking the right way to solve a problem.
Yes. So I don't know whether we've come up with any great advice on how to pick your career path in this, other than there's a lot to choose from.
And I guess my advice to people would be to go to Trailhead and see what resonates, particularly if you're trying to break into the ecosystem. And there is a skills shortage. Just like my story of signing up for a dev org and teaching myself stuff. If someone signed up for a Trailhead off their own back, showed some initiative, went and did 30 badges, and then sent in a CV and said, hey, I'd really like, give me a shot for a job, that's going to stand out to us, right?
Yeah.
And so it is a great chance for people to figure out what they like and then put themselves forward for the different roles that are out there. And it is a dynamic career, and that's one of the exciting things about it. It does evolve. You're not within these strict boundaries. You get opportunities to work on lots of different things. So still an exciting career path to take, I think.
Definitely, absolutely. As I said, I wouldn't be doing anything else. I enjoy this stuff too much. So.
Yep. Was that probably a good note for us to wrap up for this week, Peter?
I reckon so.
We won't tease too much, but we've got a pretty exciting guest lined up for next week. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for that one as we publish some more info for next week. But pretty excited about that one. I know you are too, Peter.
Absolutely. It should be very interesting. So.
Excellent. Well, we'll call it a day there and look forward to connecting with everyone again next week.
See you all next week.